Seatbelts. Jennifer, take us away.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jennifer Kane Kilgore. I'm the attorney editor for ALFIN, the Association of International Leading Firms and Networks. ALFIN is a trade association representing the common interests of international, regional, and specialty law and accounting networks. And I am here representing Mr. Steve McGarry, our president, who is unfortunately unable to be with us today. But we have a great panel, and they're going to talk to us about law and accounting during the time of COVID and how they have managed to transition during such a difficult time. I know that many of these methods that they've used during this difficult time can be applied to different situations, even though this is such a unique circumstance. And this is going to be the first in a series of webinars that are going to focus on the pandemic, and the next webinar is going to focus on firms in Europe and how they have been dealing with things. With that said, I'm going to turn control of this over to John Remsen, our moderator. John Remsen Jr. is widely recognized as one of the country's leading authorities on law firm management, and he is learned in law firm development, management, marketing, and business development. He is a frequent speaker at national, regional, and local conferences. And he has been with the American Bar Association, the Association of Legal Administrators, and the Legal Marketing Association. So, John?
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate being with you all and being invited to moderate today's kickoff session of the webinar series. And we do have a very esteemed panel of leaders of some of the world's leading networks, both accounting, law, consulting, and we should have a great conversation. Very interactive format. We've grouped ahead of time and identified some things we'd like to talk about. How are the networks evolving and adapting to this new normal? How are our member firms adapting to the new normal? How can we remain relevant, bring value, and help them through a very changing environment? And the lawyers in particular don't like change, don't like risk. And so we're all adjusting and we're all in this together. So I appreciate your willingness to join us and share how your networks are evolving and adapting to the situation. I'll quickly introduce our panel, a very esteemed group, and then we'll jump right into our questions. And as I mentioned, a very interactive and conversational format. We'll run about an hour, and Jennifer will take us home when we're done with our discussion. So first among us is Terry Pepper Gavlik, and Terry is the Chief Business Officer at Terralex. And Terralex has 160 jurisdictions represented, 29 years in business. It's exclusively law firms, been around about 29 years, so a well-established network. Terry has been with the organization for almost 5 years. Before that, 10 years at Hildebrandt, an in-house marketer. That's how we came to know each other. It seems like yesterday, Terry, but I think it's been about 100,000 years.
It's been about
Terry,
that long.
We have known each other a long, long time, so it's good to reconnect with you and have you with us today. Terry, you're supposed to say good to be here.
It froze. I'm so sorry. Good to be here.
It always happens at the worst time, right? Usually the leaf blowers start firing up for me. I work out of my home here in Atlanta. So Terry, glad to have you with us. And,
thank you.
As well, we have Michael Reese. Michael, am I pronouncing your last name properly? Michael Reese.
It's Michael Rice, but it's perfectly fine. I've heard worse than that.
Thank you for your forgiveness. Michael Rice. Michael is the global CEO of GGI, also known as Geneva Group International. And that's a mix of both accounting and law firms and consulting firms, multidisciplinary, some 605 members in 126 countries, been around 25 years. There is Zurich-based entity. And Michael's been with the group for about 17 years, former chair of this group, AILFN. So Michael, good to have you with us as well.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you with us and nice to meet you. Nice to see you. Martin Sharp. Martin is the executive director at DFK International. DFK is based in London, 220 member firms, 90 countries, 60 years in business, and it combines accounting, law, tax, advisory. And as I was reading a little bit about DFK, I come to learn they have a mascot and they've got a rock band, which is kind of different within networks, but a lot of fun. Martin's been the executive director for 11 years and has been a member of the Royal Air Force for 30 years. So Michael, good to have you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here, John, and nice to meet everybody on the call. I know one or two others, but nice to meet everybody.
Well, I love your background, Michael. That's a powerful effect. That black background looks good. And last but certainly not least is Tim Violet. Tim's the executive director of Harmony. Harmony is a consortium, mostly defense-related firms, started in New York City in 1992. Exclusively law firms, invitation only, mostly US, but expanding internationally more and more. Some 5,000 lawyers represented within the network. They're Minneapolis-based. Tim's been the executive director for 19 years, and prior to that was the general counsel of an agribusiness entity in Minneapolis. So Tim, glad you're with us as well.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I'm John. Jennifer introduced me. I've been doing consulting work with law firms forever and a day. I was an in-house marketer when I met Terry Gavlik. We were both in high school at the time.
Yeah.
And actually, I was about 30. She was about 3. I've been doing conferences for managing partners of mid-sized law firms, mostly US based, but increasingly international. We do an annual conference and been doing a lot of webinars this year because we're not meeting in person like we used to. So we've all gone virtual and trying to learn how to use GoToMeeting and Zoom and webinar and all these programs. So we'll talk about all these issues and how these networks, these prominent networks, are evolving and adapting to our changing market in the virtual world. So we got together, compiled our questions, and I'm going to start with you, Tim. You just completed a survey of your member firms and have some interesting feedback to share with us, kick off our conversation as to how they're evolving and adapting. What did you learn?
Well, there are several different pieces. We focused on the people side, the property side, and then the business side. And by the business side, I mean things as mundane, but as important as receivables, billable hours, input of new files, processing existing files, how do you move them forward in a time with no trials. There's just a lot of different things that we've learned, but maybe we could just start with the people side, which I found probably the most important, because to hold a group together, you have to have your people committed to your entity. So connecting with those folks has been probably, to use an expression, a Zoom experience, because we have regular meetings of our firm managers, but within our firms, each of them are doing Zoom meetings on a regular basis to keep in touch. But we have found 100% of our firms have people working remotely, some level. 100% of our firms have some minimal staff coming to the office for mail, in many cases to get things as simple as checks, to have their people be able to write checks out on the bills they owe. In terms of other staffing things, we have found that now that we've started to open up a bit more around the United States, people are adopting various plans. So we have, many of them have an A-B plan. This group of attorneys and staff is assigned to Group A, this to Group B. A comes in on Monday, Tuesday, they sanitize Wednesday. Group B comes in on Thursday and Friday. So I think the people side has been one of the more interesting. 97% of our firms report no staff reductions. 3% have dealt with some administrative furloughing just because they're doing less secretarial work, less reception work, less people event work. So I was pleased to see that most of our folks are staying in place. So that's the people side. And why don't I just stop at the people side? I'm sure you'll be turning to the property and the business side later, but I found that to be some of the more interesting stuff. And we wanted to do the survey to have hard numbers, and I supplied you with many of them, rather than some of the anecdotal things I've heard, which really, it's hard to say that this is universal or it's just this one firm or this one lawyer reporting it. So we actually did a comprehensive survey of all of the firms.
Now, have you shared that survey with your member firms?
Oh, yes, yes.
Yeah, they're real interested in knowing how other firms are dealing with the situation. So that's a great value add.
I got a wide range of comments, but most of them just found it very interesting to actually have hard survey data rather than getting somebody's impression over the phone.
Right. Any of the others before we move around the table? Terry, have you guys reached out to your membership in any way? Done some
Oh yeah,
surveys?
well, not in a written survey instrument, but we have a team of people that regularly call all of our member firms and have conversations with them. One of the things that I found was interesting, because we've had a lot of meetings of law firm leaders, managing partners, to share how they're rolling back into their offices. What's been, I would have to say, sad to watch on a global basis is how many of our members had a great plan, enacted it, went back to the office, and then had to go back home again and work remotely again because they would have another outbreak in their country or things like that. So now they're on plan B or plan C or plan D, and it's just such an, you have to just be so nimble and flexible because it's ever changing.
Are you finding that certain regions of the world are coping a bit more effectively than others?
If you asked me Monday, I'd say one region, and then they'll get hit with another outbreak. And Tuesday, I'd say something else. I mean, New Zealand was doing great for a while, and now they're hit again. Asia Pacific overall was recovering for a while, and now they're not. And Europe then was recovering, and now they're not. So it's just a moving feast. Yeah, ever changing.
Ever changing, but reaching out to the members, important. Michael, are you guys reaching out to your members in any way? Anything to try to, really connect with them?
Yes, indeed. I mean, when we noticed that this was going to be a global challenge and not just a local adventure, we immediately communicated with all the members with a letter and labeled the program or the vision, "We Stay Connected." So that was the first message. We will, despite all odds, be in touch with all of you with individual calls, with a whole series of webinars that we put in place. There was a bit of hope that in-person meetings towards the end of the year would still materialize and that it would all be over within a couple of weeks. We noticed that wasn't the case. But immediately we took action, and it was very well perceived. The response was immensely positive and interactive.
Terrific. And Martin, let's round out with you on this kickoff question. What are you guys doing at the
Yeah, similarly, we have done a very specific survey to find out how members are doing, very targeted questions. And we were surprised by some of the results, which is that we were essentially asking, how's the firm holding up? And most are holding up extremely well. We did know that people were busy, but we did think collections were going to be hit quite hard. Turns out not to be the case for all. That is in some regions and jurisdictions, and I would point particularly to those where government support is not available because the governments just don't have any money. And here we're talking specifically about Central and South America, compared to Europe, United States, and some parts of Asia Pacific, where government interventions have helped clients. But those places, other places, the private sector is pretty much high and dry in the current circumstances. Governments, through force of circumstance, have privatized debt. But I would support, from our experience, what Tim was saying about how firms are operating in terms of return to work and numbers that are there. The vast majority are continuing to work from home in almost all jurisdictions of the world, even though they're able to go back to the office under local restrictions. They've chosen not to do so, other than relatively small numbers, particularly in the major metros. That's where there's the major problem, where people are dependent on public transport. Those that are not returning, because I think the anxiety is about getting to and from the office rather than being at the office. And of course, for some, working from home is a blessing, depending on circumstances. Whereas for others, depending on their own domestic situation, it can be terribly difficult. It's a mixed picture everywhere.
So as we come out of this, and we will someday, do you think there's some permanent changes in terms of remote working that are going to, embed within legal, accounting, consulting? Martin, I'll bring that back to you. You think
Yes,
these are permanent changes, this
Yes,
work
I
at
don't
home,
think
this
anybody
flexibility?
I don't think anybody doubts that the working from home, which was already a trend, it was well established in some countries. I would point to Denmark, for instance, where for them the notion of working from home is something they've been doing for years. Very progressive, generally speaking, in the Nordic countries. I think this now is much more routine. Employers will offer much more flexibility to employees, and employees will demand more flexibility. But it will, I think, be a more mixed picture than it is today. There'll be more people returning to the office when the circumstances permit, but there'll be components of what we're doing now that I think will endure to a greater degree than we're expecting. It's sort of an acceleration into the future, isn't it?
Yes, that's what we've been saying. It's an acceleration of trends, embracing technology, and becoming a bit more self-sufficient and comfortable, particularly for senior professionals who've learned, hey, I can print my documents. I can do it. I can actually send my own email too and track my time electronically and these sorts of things. Are you finding our preamble, the session description that Steve had drafted, suggested that accounting firms have adapted a bit more easily, were a bit more prepared for this than the law firms? Are you finding that to be the case? Those of you who have multi-jurisdictional groups? And Michael, I'll start with you on that one.
Well, I think it's in the nature of the business. It's a bit more difficult to plead in court virtually than to handle an audit report or to compile accounting documents together. So I think that was potentially one of the reasons maybe why the accounting firms were more prone to be used to the new way of doing business. But I wouldn't say that there is a different level of resilience or a different mindset, so to say. So accounting firms, law firms are professional service firms where one breed happens to plead in court whilst the others don't.
Okay. And Martin, are you observing a difference between how the law firms have responded and adapted versus accounting?
I would endorse everything that Michael said. I think it's down to the nature of the work. Some accounting firms have adapted better than others, of course. Some were better placed in terms of the degree to which they had automated or gone electronic for a lot of their processes. And the same would be true, I suppose, to a degree with the accountants. But there are parts of the work. Even within firms, there are different specialities that are able to adapt differently. So obviously, defense work, prosecutional work is much more difficult than it is routine conveyancing, say, which could be done remotely. And that's true in the accounting firms too, those that are doing consultancy services, some of those, the transactional services, are not so straightforward without the interaction with the client, whereas some accounting can be automated and monitored remotely much more readily.
Interesting, thank you. Let me move on to our next question, and I'm going to direct this one to Martin. And you mentioned some surprises as you reached out to your members. And what are some of those bigger surprises as we've all had to change the way we work and operate?
I think the thing that I would not have expected was the speed of adaptability. Large firms within hours, certainly within days, were able to reconstitute, reorganize how they do business, engage with their people while still sustaining support to their clients. It was a remarkable piece of work over a period of weeks and in some cases months to keep the business going, keep the people in track, set up systems and processes to help and support people remotely. A massive change in a very short space of time. And I think if I'd been asked, I would not have expected such resilience so universally. A couple of exceptions in places where these things are really difficult. I'm thinking of parts of Africa. One of our firms in I'm sure you won't mind me mentioning, in Uganda, the IT infrastructure just doesn't support it to the degree it does in other places. So if those of us who remember the days of dial-up internet, well, that's sort of almost the level that some are working with, and trying to work with your people, where electricity is not reliable 24 hours a day, let alone internet. It's a different proposition than it is in the major metros.
So the speed at which firms reacted to this, it took a pandemic to force this change. But that's exactly what we're seeing, in our work with managing partners. Tim, what surprises are you observing this year as pandemic sets
the
in?
diversity of the impact on the business side across the country. We have some firms reporting business down in excess of 20%. We have other firms that are reporting that the business is up. I'm trying to understand how that could be by region or state, but there is no uniform pattern.
Interesting.
The trucking business, I suspect, will continue to see a downward trend in files. We do a lot of defense work for the major trucking companies in both intermodal and on the highways, and we're seeing a lot less traffic, a lot less accidents. So that will certainly account for some of the turn down in business. Yeah. But it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, I'm not quite sure. So we will be doing some additional follow-up study of that to see if there's something that maybe as a group we should be doing differently as we look at the diversity of the files and the clients and the business across the country. But I was somewhat surprised that there was such a difference between how this firm was being affected and the firm over here being affected in completely the opposite direction.
And these are all firms within the U.S., correct, that you
Right.
surveyed? So this is just within the United States.
We did just the United States only because we felt that there would be more uniformity in the results rather than our being able to compare what's happening, for example, in London versus what's happening maybe in Minneapolis. So we decided to focus strictly on the United States this time around. What we may consider doing additional work with our European firms next.
Interesting. Thank you. Terry, what's surprising you?
So I'm going to answer it more from a macro level, from the perspective of being a network. And I've actually talked to my counterparts at some other networks that are having the same experience. What's that Winston Churchill quote? Never waste a good crisis, or something along those lines.
Never let a good crisis go to waste.
Go to waste. We have seen since March the level of collaboration, firms wanting to join our network, joint proposals to clients across multiple jurisdictions increase to numbers we've not seen before. That's been all the things we've had on our platform. And I think it's the crisis and the fact that people can't get on a plane and can't travel and can't be face-to-face and can't be with their counterparts has proven sort of that trust model of a network where they trust each other and they're now relying on each other more. And so we've actually been busier than ever in business development and client engagements and also in recruiting. We just added a new member today, as a matter of fact. We've added probably more members this year in jurisdictions that we previously didn't have membership, so it's not replacing members, than at least in my tenure with the organization.
Wow. Now, are these new members coming to your organization? Or are you going out and finding them? And they're just very receptive?
It's a combination. In the past, we mostly went out because we're invitation only, and we have a really significant vetting process. And so often in the past, members that would approach us wouldn't have met our membership criteria. The difference now is members that are approaching us are the leading firms in their jurisdictions.
Wow. And to me, that's almost counterintuitive, because one of the questions I had in the back of my head as we were preparing for today's session is, are you prepared to lose members?
We haven't
Because
lost
we're going to
any.
look at our budgets and we're trying to rein in expenses, and we can't meet in person anymore. And why do we need this network? Well, you're finding the exact opposite.
Just the opposite. We have to be able to prove the return on investment, and we've had no problem with that. We have not lost members, and people are paying their dues because they're seeing the value. The one thing we did that's a little bit different is instead of having the dues payments in one payment when they would normally be due, we're letting members spread that across a couple of months because it's not specifically an issue of billings and collections are down overall. It's more cash flow issues. So we're trying to help them manage their cash flow in that regard.
Most of them are paying their dues on time. You just breaking it up into installments for them.
Exactly.
Terrific, terrific. And Michael, what's surprising you as we see things happening?
Well, of course, I can echo what was already said. The speed, how fast all the firms were in adapting with the new situation, and I would even dare say embracing it to a certain extent. So we were in touch with, of course, a lot of firms, almost all the firms. Some people were a bit gloomy and doomy, but most of the people, they said, no, we just have to stay on track. We'll have to work hard and we'll overcome that. And the solidarity among the member firms was impressive. The solidarity and the interest. Have you spoken to the Italian members or the Spanish members or the Argentine ones, or wherever there was a very harsh situation? Other members wanted to know how they were contacting them. There were calls based out of solidarity and out of friendship. And
Friendship.
I would not have expected that to this degree and extent.
Interesting. Have you seen a surge of interest, folks wanting to join your network?
Well, there are some jurisdictions and some countries where we could set up another 5 networks. It seems they all want to join. India is one of them, for instance. I cannot explain why. There are 2 or 3 European countries. In the United Arab Emirates, there is on a regular basis, we are approached by firms who want to join. We have seen that some firms have understood how important it is to be connected, and specifically when you cannot travel, and you need to get something sorted. And having a network of vetted firms where you have gone through a process to decide are they fit for purpose, just as Terry said before, that is very, very valuable. And of course, you will not be able to avoid that. There are firms who say, okay, business is slightly down, let's dump the network, let's dump the coffee machine, and let's save some money. I think it's the wrong approach, and we see that the vast majority of firms with a certain size and standing and international outreach, they would never dream of giving up their network, because that would be really a wrong decision.
And John, one thing I'll add to that is the actual cost of network participation for firms in the network anywhere in the world right now is down, even if their dues stay the same, because they spend thousands of dollars to travel to meetings that they're not doing now. So it's a bargain.
So the value proposition increases.
Exactly.
This is really interesting and counterintuitive, to a casual observer, what you're actually seeing. Martin, anything before we move to our next topic? Are you seeing that solidarity, that
Yes. I think we would characterize our culture as being one of kindness to one another. It's quite remarkable to see. We see quite deep emotions on some of these calls between members who've known each other for years and really caring about one another and sharing their feelings. Quite surprising, some of that on the theme of what's surprising. And we too have not seen members leaving. We've seen greater reliance unexpectedly, and increased inquiries in some of those in unusual jurisdictions, places we haven't been before. We're looking at taking on new firms, but similarly to Michael, we get those inquiries from places where we're already well found, and there are people out there looking for networks. There's plenty of business around for the network.
I agree. I'm a huge proponent of the networks, and we tend to work managing partners mid-law, and we've polled them in the past. Are you a member of a law firm network affiliation, what have you? And we have found, last time we asked the question, might have been 3 years ago, 40% claimed to be a member of one of the law firm networks. I was surprised how low that was. I'm a huge proponent, you know, find the right group, do your due diligence. Once you find it, you got to participate and jump in and give to get. And Tim, what are you seeing at Harmony in terms of new member interest and solidarity among the member firms?
Well, the solidarity thing, I would echo what was said earlier. In terms of new members, it's not really, it has never been a focus of the Harmony Group just to add firms. We go where our client if you will, takes us. So for us to open a firm or approach a firm in ABC country and not be able to provide business development, input, referrals, and in some way bring them a value to them, we do it the other way around. When we have a need, then we will look for a firm, because then we can promise them an entree of business and then a connection to the rest of the group as well. But we have, we probably turn down 3 to 4 requests a month. In many cases, they're in places where we already have the largest defense firm in the country, and we're just not in a position to add another one without setting up competition between the firms. And that's one thing that we try to, as hard as we can, to avoid. We want them working collaboratively, not competing with each other for the business introductions they get.
That's what makes the network so neat. You're among collaborating firms, not direct competitors. And I think there's a much more of a willingness to open up, share what's working, what's not working, help one another out. Because you have that geographic exclusivity and that comfort level that, you know, I'm not sharing my deep, dark secrets with competitors. These folks are on our side and we're working together. So excellent. Terry, I'm going to move to you and talk about virtual conferences. I have read numerous articles featuring your organization and you as to how you pulled off your virtual annual international meeting. And what might you recommend to other network executives who are moving to virtual conferences, webinars, what have you? How'd yours go? What are your tips to success?
Yeah, I'll use 2 more cliches here. One is necessity is the mother of invention, and also timing is everything. So when the pandemic hit and people started working remotely, we were about a month and a half out from our next in-person global meeting. We do them twice a year. That was scheduled in Oslo, Norway. So we had to act very quickly. And, you know, everyone at that point early on thought, oh, this is going to last 2 weeks and we'll all be back to normal. But as soon as we realized it wasn't, we had to do a pivot to putting on a virtual global meeting. And so I have been, because of those articles you saw, I've been getting calls daily practically from people asking what we did. And often those questions focus on the platform, the format, and the technology, but that is not what our starting point was. Our starting point was to sit down and say, what is it about our in-person meetings that our members value the most? And how could we replicate that when they can't, you know, be in a room together? And we looked at, you know, the technologies, but we ended up putting on a virtual global meeting on the same date range that would have been in Oslo. We had, whereas in Oslo, in an in-person meeting, we probably would have had about 200 to 250 people attending. We had 644. So it gave us an opportunity to reach folks in our member firms that normally wouldn't have gotten the budget or the opportunity to travel to an in-person meeting. They might have gone to a regional meeting, but they certainly couldn't have come to a global meeting. We pre-recorded all the content. So we pre-recorded substantive sessions, the general session, new member showcases, everything we would have done on a stage in a real meeting, and we made that available on demand. It's still available to our members. And then we reserved the Zoom sort of sessions for all kinds of global networking, virtual networking. And we had about 25 sessions. We had sessions for every region of the world. We had sessions for our practice groups, our industry sector teams, and our affinity groups like managing partners, human resources professionals. My team, I have a team of 11. Someone had asked me as we were preparing for this call, did we get training? We sort of crowdsourced it amongst ourselves, and we practiced. We set up, you know, protocols and rules, and I think that's important. We had at least 2 team members on every virtual session, so that if something went wrong, someone else could step in. And we used Zoom. We'll probably do that again. We have another virtual meeting, global meeting coming up in November, but this time we'll integrate it with our regular conference program, which is CVent. But with Zoom, you have the ability to put people into breakout sessions. So we would have sort of a kickoff, and then we move people into breakout sessions. And this was in June, so it's why we got a lot of press. We were kind of first out of the box. But what we found was a lot of those discussions, people just wanted to commiserate, which was great. And we're glad they did that. Since then, we now are having these kinds of virtual sessions routinely, and they're focusing more on client issues, substantive discussions and things like that, and a little less on, how people are going back to work or things like that, the COVID related kinds of things, although that creeps into a lot of discussions, but it is going back to sort of business as usual. So we're looking forward to our next meeting in November. We were supposed to be in Mexico City. We're sad we're not going to be going there. We're hopeful that next year in June we'll be able to pick back up in Oslo. But I think we will never get away now from doing virtual meetings, and we'll have a combination of virtual and global because we realized it extended our reach within our members.
That was my next question. Once we can meet and assemble, our virtual meetings going to go away, or will they kind of supplement and augment our in-person meetings?
Yeah, they won't go away at Terralex. They'll be both forms.
And was your conference a multi-day
it was
extravaganza?
Yes, because we had so many sessions and so few staff, we did it over 3 days, which the conference would have been 3 days, and we had to accommodate time zones and whatnot.
Yes.
The on-demand content, we rolled out each day certain amount of the on-demand content so that you weren't getting 30 sessions that you had to watch on a video all at once. And again, like I said, that's still available to our members so they can watch. If they missed it during the June meeting, they can still watch it. One thing I'll mention we did that we thought was really fun and different. We decided to have a keynote speaker, because we often did, and we retained a woman named Julia Jones, who's coming out of England, and she uses music and neuroscience for things like to help you compete, for attitude, for motivation, for leadership. So we pre-recorded that session, but we picked a group of about 20 members from around the world and my team to be the surrogate for the audience, because it was participatory. So there were times where we were all muted and there was music playing and we were pretending we were doing instruments, and it was a lot of fun. So you can do a few things virtually that you maybe couldn't do in a live session.
That's fantastic. And so they pre-recorded, you said. So were you doing much audience polling?
In the virtual session, no, we weren't doing a lot of audience polling. It's not a normal feature of our regular global meetings anyway. I mean, if we do polling, it's different. Some practice groups did, or industry sector teams did some things like that. But generally, the heart of, and as my colleagues on this call have said, the heart of any network is these deeply, closely personal held relationships. People wanted to talk to each other. They wanted to see each other. They wanted to commiserate. They wanted to see their friends that they would have been sitting at a dinner with in Oslo. And that is what we tried to inject in the live sessions, because that meant the most to people. And the feedback was amazing from our members, and they want more.
Was the technology fairly smooth?
The technology was remarkably smooth. We were concerned because about a month before that, in a webinar we were doing, we had a Zoom bomb. But we learned, that's where we went back to school, and we learned what protocols you need to put in place, and Zoom also put their patches in place. And we had a very seamless experience. It was remarkable to us that we didn't have a lot more technology issues, honestly. But yeah, it worked great for us. And so I've been looking at a lot of different platforms, and I've had so many different organizations contact me. I've been a guest on other platforms, and I would say some of them are costly and a little bit overly complex for what we were trying to accomplish. They're great for big trade shows and things like that. We'll just stick to the basics, stick to the simple. It worked great for us.
Terrific. Thank you for sharing. Michael, your experience with virtual conferencing, virtual meetings, what's working and how's it going?
Well, it's a fairly recent experience. We used to we have about 18 different practice groups that are very, very active throughout the year with newsletters, with in-person meetings and so on. Generally, on top of that, we have about 20 events throughout the year, regional, global, European, French-speaking, German-speaking. So generally, the focus was on the in-person meetings. And some attempts were made before the pandemic to have webinars for practice groups, and they were okayish, but not overwhelming. So when we had to change from the real world to the virtual world, we just started, and the echo was very, very positive. We are planning to have a virtual conference, but very compressed, because all the practice group live is going on literally as we go. So there's every week there are a couple of different webinars, and we don't need to compress that for a specific date. And the experience was very positive. I think it has helped to bridge the gap. And I'm wondering what we would have done with the same pandemic 40 years ago. I think we would all have had rather quiet moments.
I think so.
You're right.
And are you finding, as Terry, you're getting more participation among your member firms because we don't have to put the bill for the travel and all those good things? It might prohibit more representation from a particular firm to your conference.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it was very nice to see that some people you would generally not see attending conferences, that they logged in. Of course, we decided to run all the webinars and everything completely for free. Internal, external speakers. This is, I mean, that's the least we can do for our members. And it was lovely to see how more and more people were logging in and actively involved, and it broadened the outreach and helped to develop new contacts among members.
And are yours, like Terry's, tending to be pre-recorded and then available on demand to your members, or do you do more live programming?
We do more live webinars, with, of course, all the surprises that can happen, from the ringing phone, the barking dog, the mother-in-law who's upset, which shows a bit that this is real life, and it's really live. And then, of course, they're available at a later stage, so people can log in and they can watch the practice group session or the specific session at their ease.
Don't upset the mother-in-law.
Never.
Never. And Martin, what's been your experience with virtual conferencing and meetings?
Focus and orientation is remaining mostly around interaction between members. We have run webinars on professional topics. Turnout has not been spectacular on those. We probably won't do a conference substitute. I was very interested to hear Terry's experience. But I think the nature of our engagement with people tends to be the smaller group discussions is more popular. That's where people get the real value. I say smaller, not necessarily small. And there have been 100-person events, a couple of hundred people on one call, where we did have a very prestigious presenter that attracts an audience. But the real value comes from that discussion in smaller groups. One of our more fun events, we had a global happy hour, which began at 5 p.m. in New Zealand, which I think was 6 a.m. here in London, and continued through, exactly, and continued through. We only made it to the West Coast. We didn't quite stretch it out to Alaska and Hawaii, but we pretty much went around the world. So it's 20 hours. I found myself enjoying a small beverage with different people around the world.
That is ambitious.
I couldn't have handled that one, Martin. I would
Just for each hour.
Very
San Francisco firm capped the day very kindly by christening a cocktail the Martin Sharp, and that was a very tasty,
very cool
gin and lemon cocktail. So yeah,
very cool. And how are you guys doing, Tim, on your virtual programming?
Well, we've done it on some of the practice areas. We've got one coming up here shortly. The sign up is twice what we would have gotten in person, so you can look at that as a positive. It does present some issues. We typically do these on a regional basis around the country, and we try to get local credits for claims adjusters, for example. Many states have requirements for that. Well, now that we've opened this up to everybody, I'm getting requests from states that charge an exorbitant fee to get the course approved. And then all of a sudden, are you getting them done, approved in 30 or 40 or 50 states, and then driving the cost up for the value received for on the event. But our internal virtual get-togethers, happy hours, our breakout sessions after our work sessions have all been very well received. We're struggling with the issue of what comes next. I think virtual will stay because it's convenient to do things for more people in more geographies. But the closeness of our members is because of the personal relationships they built in 100, 200 face-to-face get-togethers around the world. And I suspect that once there's a vaccine and there's some sort of safety and confidence of being able to resume, well, I don't think the practice will resume in office as it was before. I think we will see a full slate of people willing to come to events and see their friends of 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah,
Probably can't wait to come back to the reunion and reconnect with everybody. I mean, I think there's a real pent-up demand for conferences and breaking bread and sharing drinks. And that's so often where the most meaningful friendships and bonds and conversations form is, you know, the coffee break, the cocktail hour, the dine around, whatever it might be. I'm looking at the time here. Jennifer, what do you think? Another 15 minutes or so?
I think so.
I think we're having
15 minutes sounds good.
A nice interactive conversation. And thank you guys so much for sharing so much with networks and with groups like yours around the world. Some great.
Yeah, I think people are going to find this very useful.
Great ideas. You know, culture. I'm a big proponent of firm culture, and we all have a culture, whether we work on it or not. What binds us. And I would care to say that networks have cultures. Their member firms have cultures, but each of your networks has a very distinct and unique culture that distinguishes it from other networks and affiliations of law and accounting firms. Terry, what words would you use to describe the culture that is Terralex?
We worked hard actually with our strategic plan about almost 5 years ago now to make sure that we figured out what our culture is, and then we drove that through everything. And I think the word that mostly sums it up is collaboration, but we took it to different levels than maybe 5-10 years ago. So collaboration, our members are increasingly competing with large global law firms. And so they collaborate so that they have this platform and can be competitive because they can have an offering just as good or better when a client has multi-jurisdictional needs. Collaboration is at an all-time high within Terralex, and we hope it continues to press on that way. Our slogan for the summer has been together apart but always connected. So we have an infrastructure in place to support that, facilitate it. We use personnel and technology and a lot of other ways to facilitate collaboration. But I mentioned earlier, we've seen a significant uptick in joint pitches where you may have 20 or 30 or 50 member firms all presenting a united front to a client on a project they have in that many jurisdictions. And that takes high levels of trust and collaboration. So collaboration for us is the word. My team gets sick of me saying it so much, but it really does.
When you do the word cloud, we did a thing for the managing partner. I think we had 220 of them in, and we said, what one word would you use to describe your law firm's culture? And we did a word cloud. And the biggest word, when you clouded it all, was collaboration.
Yeah, well,
and not surprisingly, number 2 is collegial.
Yeah.
something that folks value. But does that really distinguish your network from others?
I think it does. Well, everyone collaborates. I think what's distinguished about, and a couple of years ago, we were fortunate to have won an award as a global network of the year, and the judges cited our collaboration platform. So it's not just, it wasn't just a strategic plan, it wasn't just a word, but we have a lot of ways that we can prove that that's actually baked in and hot wired into our culture. And you know, it's everything from the success stories of collaboration among members, and it's not all just competing for and winning work together, but it's lots of different things. I mean, things like putting together cross-border guides, or working on pro bono projects together, even down to the personal things like, you know, seconding lawyers from one firm to the other, or we've even had people that have exchanged their kids for sort of exchange programs. So we just, you know, we work really hard to collect these stories that prove the business model of collaboration. And we've also spent a lot of time putting the infrastructure in place to make collaboration as easy as possible. And it starts with the recruiting. And so when I do the most of the recruiting, and when I'm talking to prospective members, if they don't fit that bill, if they don't get past my sniff test, if they don't seem like a firm that would be willing to collaborate to the really extended level that we see within Terralex.
Thank you. Martin, I'll jump over to you. What one word might you use to describe the culture at DFK?
Can I sneak in three? Decency, friendliness, and kindness, just because those three letters are sitting behind me and they kind of fit with how we operate. I recognize a lot of what Terry says, particularly about the person-to-person support. I remember quite early on in my time at DFK, I heard a story of a Mexican member whose daughter was traveling in Australia. She fell ill, phoned up an Australian colleague who then took her in to the house while she recovered for 2 weeks. Now imagine if your backpacking child was feeling ill and they were staying in one of those lodgings, you'd be quite worried, but knowing that they're being supported elsewhere. So that's the kind of thing that these networks have that you could never instigate, I don't think, in a corporate structure. In those big accounting firms and huge global law firms, they're directories of numbers of specialities, whereas this is a group of professionals who know each other and have built up trust. I just wanted to follow up on something that Tim was mentioning a little earlier. And I really believe this is the case, which is that we're surviving, in fact, thriving in the current environment because we've got a legacy of relationships that were built up through human relations. And this could go on for some time. I can endure this easily for a year and perhaps longer, but not forever, because refreshing those relationships electronically and like this is not to the same level. We could function, but we couldn't thrive, I don't think, in a sustained virtual environment. There is something about that dependency. When you've met somebody, you've got to know that you've enjoyed their company for a while, that you can trust them with your children, that you probably would be very unlikely to do with people with whom you've had an electronic conversation.
Martin, when do you anticipate your next in-person multi-continental type meeting?
We were feeling quite confident about a meeting in February next year in Vienna. It was a European-focused meeting, and travel within Europe 3 weeks ago was increasingly looking straightforward and likely. Terry said how it changes day to day and week to week. Well, that's come home to us this week. So right now, I'm a little less sure about that. I hope for February, but I'm expecting that we might not be able to meet in person until probably the summer of next year. Seems more likely. We'll see. I mean, we've only been at this for 7 months now, so anything 7 months away is an entirely different proposition from where we are now.
And one of you, I can't recall back to my notes, but we were talking about coming back to in-person meetings and how are we going to roll those back out? And what's the time frame we're planning? And one of you all mentioned that we're probably going to do it by region. You know, we're not going to have an international meeting and expect people to fly in from the continents to one location, but we might have a European meeting or a North American meeting or a South American meeting, and kind of roll it out that way. Seemed to make sense. Michael, where do you see, what's the one word you'd use to describe the culture at your group?
Well, I think it would be community. And I think that nowadays we've come across a new era where values, in my eyes, are much more important than tools. I think at our level, where our networks are, of course, we have a due diligence and admission procedure, and we have a deal sharing platform and a newsletter and God knows what. I think this is just tools. This is hardware that doesn't differentiate any network from another. It's a commodity. You can buy it in. You can have all sorts of choices how you want to supply your toolbox, so to say. But what I think makes a difference, and of course, assuming that the entrance ticket is always high level professionalism. That's the entrance ticket. So then the differentiation is the values. What are the values? And I'm very proud that we have, like all of you, managed to build up a community where there is this sense of community, of belonging, a non-partisan and inclusive way of dealing with one another beyond just the business thought. And it goes across jurisdictions, nations, continents, disciplines, lawyers, accountants, consultants, but also across generations. And with staff exchange programs, with people tutoring others, with webinars or events specifically for young professionals or future leaders. And it's this sense of community, which I believe shapes the value. And not only that we spend an awful lot of time looking at firms that want to join, we also look at the people involved. You can come across fantastic firms, great firms and so on, but they have no business to refer. They're just expecting to get referrals in. So that's already a no-go. Because of course, if you have many firms with many international referrals, then automatically there's more going on. That's absolutely logical. Then the wish of becoming international by joining an international network is not enough. So there has to be a substantial cross-border activity, and not just a few percent. But ultimately, it's also the people. You want to feel comfortable with your peers, with other professionals, and whether it is virtual or in person, first you meet, and then you like each other or not, and then you trust each other, and then you refer. So again, the word that I have been carving out, sometimes people say it's like a big family, and I don't like that too much, because family comes with birthright. You're born and you're in there, whether you like it or not. No, this is a family, so to say, by co-option, where people opt for it and others endorse it and build a community because they want to work together. And I think at GGI, we've managed to build that up, and we're proud of it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Tim, what word would you use to describe harmony?
Connection. Personal connections. We've talked, Martin made a point earlier, as others have. The reason that our firms, we have zero turnover and everybody collaborates and everybody is connected, it's because they've got that personal connection. It also is the driving force behind our business development. I rarely look inward, I look outward. So I have developed personal relationships with major claims vice presidents of major corporations and insurance companies across the country to help introduce them then to my friend at this law firm over here where they might have a need, and all of a sudden they begin a personal relationship and a personal connection. So I view our role, our task, as connecting people, because once there is a personal connection, that will drive the business relationship between them. So often you hear that the practice of law is now a commodity or viewed as a commodity, and everything can be done in a back room off of a computer. Well, when somebody, at least in our end of the practice world, is in real trouble, they want somebody they can trust, and that trust is built on a personal connection.
You know, I often find myself saying clients hire lawyers, not law firms. They hire lawyers they know, they like, they trust. Trust. So important. And Michael, you made that point. We've got just a few minutes, so I'll just go around the table real quick and kind of open floor. Anything else you might want to say? Anything you might pass along to other network leaders during these unprecedented times? And I'll start alphabetically with my friend Terry Gavlik.
I would just say you have to think a little bit ahead of the curve. You know, you were asking when do we think we'll be getting together again, and nobody knows. I'm hoping it's sooner rather than later. I'm not optimistic it'll be sooner rather than later. So we're constantly, and it goes back to what we did with our virtual global meeting, we're looking at what is it that our members, and we have to hear it from them all the time, but what is it that our members value about their Terralex membership, and how can we deliver that, whether we're sitting across the room from them or on a Zoom or on a phone call or, you know, through other means. And so you have to stay super close to your members and your clients. We are very involved in the client community, just like Tim mentioned, where we connect people. You can't operate in a vacuum. You have to know that, and you have to stay nimble and flexible, because we just don't know what's coming. If you had told me in January that this is what this year would look like, I would have told you were crazy.
Yeah. So when is your next in-person meeting on the calendar right now, Terry? What are you hoping for?
Our next global meeting is next June. We're hoping we can have some regional meetings before then, but really it's going to depend on a vaccine and, you know, and or numbers going away, and there's just no way to know. It's too soon to know.
Are the hotels being flexible?
I would say the ones we had been contracted with, yes, but I am in some professional organizations, one in particular, and the hotel was so ridiculous. It cost the organization, which is a nonprofit organization, about $25,000 to not have a meeting, which is just...
You would think if they want the organization's future business, they exercise a little flexibility. And
exactly. We've been fortunate. The hotels we've been working with, but we do meetings all over the world. So we're an organization and we work with a conference company. It would be, and be kind of silly to burn bridges.
We're all paying real close attention to that force majeure clause in the contracts.
Exactly.
Alpha, I promise. So that brings us to Michael Rice. What are your parting shots, Michael?
Well, I think the next in-person meeting will be on a Wednesday or a Thursday. The trouble with this pandemic is that generally predictions aiming at the future have always been a very difficult science to tackle. But I think it's even more difficult now with this pandemic. We take it as it comes. We have to juggle a couple of conferences. We had to cancel them. Some hotels were wonderful. Some, very few, were horrible. And we have to make the best out of it. I think whenever it works, it will work. I think there will be a hybrid approach in the future. So it's not that everybody will jump back and go and attend in-person meetings. Some people might wait for longer. Some firms might decide not to attend with 4 or 5 people, but maybe with 2 or 3 people. So we're prepared to have this hybrid approach and to go on with the virtual events as long as they make sense, together with in-person events as soon as we can have them.
Thank you. And Mr. Sharp.
Yes, flexibility is undoubtedly something we need, as Terry was making clear. I think staying close to the members is the answer, and be sure of what your own members want. We can hear a lot from other firms and networks about what they're doing. It may not be actually what your particular group wants. So we won't necessarily do the same as as others, we'll probably do less on the technical webinar conference side. We'll do much more on the person-to-person meeting side. I suspect that that's what will be. But the other point is to look to next year. Legal and accounting services are a lag indicator in economies often. They can be doing quite well because they have work to do at the outset. But when the economy takes a real bite and the clients are declining, then 2021 could be a very difficult year in all sorts of ways. So we just need to be ready for that. And be ready to, we're already a very low cost operation, as you were extolling the virtues of associations and networks. We might be necessary just to ensure we've got reserves to see us through a pretty lean period in the coming years, because we continue to offer value even if we can't get together next year.
And probably more value than ever when you think about it. And based upon what I've learned, our conversation today, the connection, the trust, the collaboration, and nothing replaces in person. But
Martin does raise a good point, because it'll be interesting to see what the professional services firms do this fall. A lot of them do their budgeting for next year this fall. So it'll be interesting to see if they're going to budget for meetings and attendance and things like that.
Yes. Well, and then they've got the quarantine policies when people come back to the office. I mean, there's lots of stuff going on. And Tim, last and certainly not least, why don't you take us home, Tim? What?
Well, nothing happens until there's a vaccine. Consumer confidence is not going to return until people have something that they can actually rely on. In-person meetings. We might all be willing to test the odds and show up at a place, but I can tell you that our clientele right now has no travel policies. They have cash flow issues. They have financial situations to deal with. We're hoping for a meeting in January, but it looks maybe 50-50 at best. I would agree with a comment Michael made earlier about projecting what might happen in the future. I would say I have followed the projections of the death rates and the curves and all of the rest of it. And all I can say is that they make weathermen look very accurate.
Yeah.
Look at the numbers. Here in Minnesota, they have missed by a factor of 40, 50, 60% what was going to happen. Some on the bad side, some on the good side. And all that means and all it demonstrates is nobody really knows what's going to happen.
Nobody knows.
And until there's a vaccine, we're all going to be meeting like this, kind of on an impersonal basis, all hoping for the best, that we can soon, again, get together with our friends.
I think we all want to be there, don't we? And but safely, and that's first and foremost. So thank you, lady and gentlemen. I think we had a really interesting and thought-provoking conversation. And thanks for being so open, so candid, so sharing as to what your networks are doing to evolve and adapt through these uncharted waters. So thank you again on behalf of Steve McGarry and the Association, International Association Law Firm Networks. Pleasure to be with you. Thank you again. And Jennifer, let me take it back to you to wind us out.
All right, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. Michael Bryce of GGI, Geneva Group International, Martin Sharp of DFK, Terry Pepper-Gavalik of Terralex, and Tim Violet of the Harmony Group, John Remsen of the Remsen Group. Thank you so much for moderating. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day, and we'll hopefully see you soon.
Bye-bye.
See you all, and best wishes to Steve.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I will tell him.
Bye, y'all. Thank you
Bye-bye.
again.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye.